Now, I'm never going to be allowed into the real cockpit of a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. That's right, the same kind of bomber that unleashed hell in the form of bombs dropped on 3 nuclear sites in Iran as part of Operation Midnight Hammer. But I did want to show you what the inside of one of these aircraft looks like. And this is what it is. This is an actual representation of what the inside of a B-2 looks like. Very few, a tiny, select, exclusive club of strategic pilots in the United States Air Force ever sees this kind of thing for real. This is the cockpit of a B-2, precisely of the kind that actually conducted that daring mission over Iran. As you can see, unlike a fighter cockpit, in a B-2, the 2 pilots sit side by side. It's completely dimly lit. Behind me is the cockpit panel display, which is a mix of digital and analog instruments. It's tightly spaced, it is constricted, but it is designed perfectly for ultra long range missions. And as you've probably been seeing in our coverage, this particular mission, Operation Midnight Hammer, involved aircraft of this kind with 2 pilots sitting in these 2 seats and flying, can you believe it, for 36 full hours. Now, I'm only showing you one part of the cockpit that you see here, but there's a whole other view that has never been publicly released, and I'm going to give you a view of that here on tonight's show. From the closed world of stealth aircraft and aviation buffs to becoming the dominating image of America's bombing of Iran under Operation Midnight Hammer, the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber is the intimidating, mysterious face of this global story, what you've just seen. And 48 hours ago, these aircraft flew one of the most audacious missions in the history of not just American air power, but air power itself. A 36-hour non-stop strike from the United States all the way to Iran and back without landing even once. These jets never landed. It didn't need to. It was refueled mid-air multiple times, staying airborne because in the sky these aircraft are invisible. On the ground, satellites see everything and they become vulnerable and can be picked up. And that's why they had to stay in the air for 36 hours. And inside, well, I've shown you one view, but there's a whole other view. It's cramped, of course, but not primitive. There's a microwave, a toilet, and a bunk bed, as you can see in these pictures from Microsoft Flight Simulator, and a storage rack full of snacks. Now, 2 pilots fly the B-2, sometimes a 3rd tags along to rotate, and they've got just enough crew comforts to keep them not hungry, not thirsty, and able to go to the toilet. It's one of the most common questions that everybody's been asking when they heard that this was a 36-hour mission where the plane didn't land even once. That's right. Those snack cabinets contain candy bars, milk, cereal, sandwiches, whatever the pilots would want to sustain them on a 36-hour flight. 2 pilots, sometimes a 3rd tags along, 1 flies, 1 rests, 1 stays sharp. For 33 out of the 36 hours of this mission into Iran, it was silence and sky, just cruising. And then the final 3 hours of silent flight over Iran as these amazing aircraft penetrated Iranian airspace. Invisible but vulnerable, the tension would have been absolutely at its peak, which is not saying anything because bomber pilots trained to fly these are calm as hell. Even in a stealth aircraft, there's no room for mistakes. The crew on high alert, locked in, and then the GBU-57 bunker buster bombs that we've told you about would have fallen from the bomb bay on the belly of these aircraft. Incredibly, the B-2 Spirit is an aircraft in the autumn of its life. It doesn't seem like it, does it? Just look at it. It has futuristic written all over it. The B-2 will soon, by the way, hand over the baton to its replacement, an aircraft called the B-21 Raider, which, by the way, is already in flight test. It is newer, stealthier, much more expensive, deadlier, and will be part of America's new fleet of aircraft to conduct missions of this kind going forward. But for now, it's this cockpit that did the job. 2 pilots, 36 hours, and just like I showed you, a toilet, a microwave, and a cabinet full of food. And I want to show you how the B-2 bomber and all these pictures, information, and videos about Operation Midnight Hammer have raised a very important question on Indian social media and in the Indian public mind, which is, does India have a bomber of this kind, and does India need a bomber? But first, let me show you what active strategic bombers actually exist in the world today. Well, you know all about the B-2 already because that's the one that flew the mission into Iran. But what are the other long-range strategic bombers that are currently active in service right now? There is the famous B-52. I'm sure you've heard that. It's called the Stratofortress. It's also American. There's a third long-range bomber called the B-1B Lancer. It's a swing-wing, supersonic strategic bomber in service with the US Air Force. India's neighbor China has the Xi'an H-6, which is a strategic bomber. It's the sole type in service with the Chinese. Russia, like the Americans, has 3 different varieties of strategic bomber. It's got the Tupolev Tu-160, it's got the Tupolev 22M, which is its second type of bomber, and it's got the turboprop driven Tu-95, also by Tupolev. So America has 3 different varieties, including the B-2. Russia has 3, and the Chinese have 1. No other country in the world has a long-range strategic bomber. Before I go to the big question of why India doesn't have a bomber now and hasn't operated one for nearly 20 years now, I want to show you these beautiful evocative pictures of the B-2 Spirits returning to their home base in Missouri in the United States after their 36-hour flight. I want to remind you, viewer, that these are pictures of the aircraft landing after 36 hours in the air. Just think about that for a moment. The pilots inside, the engines, the aircraft have been operationally on and in the air for 36 hours, and this is them touching down after that full mission. Now, it isn't always that India has been without bombers. It has had bombers in the past. The British left some bomber types in Indian service when they left India after independence. In fact, till 1968, India operated a small fleet of an aircraft called the B-24 Liberator. That's an aircraft you will only find in aviation museums now. Then between 1957 and 2007, the Indian Air Force operated the Canberra aircraft. It's a British-built aircraft. Initially, it was used as a bomber. Towards the end of its service, in the latter part of its life, it was used for photo reconnaissance. Famously, the Canberras were supposed to have been used during the 1962 war, but for many reasons, they were not. In 2007, the final Canberras were retired, and 2007 onwards, there have been no bombers in Indian service. Let's get a sense of where things are at as far as this question is concerned. Why doesn't India have bombers? Should India have bombers? Will we need them in the future? Is it right to compare or see what has happened in Iran right now as a reason to think about why India doesn't have bombers? Let's hear from the experts because, frankly, they know best. And I'm very privileged to be joined by 2 of our very well-known air power analysts and experts. Angad Singh, our favorite aviation writer and commentator, joins us tonight from Berlin. I've managed to convince him to take some time off to be on the show tonight. Thank you, Angad. Air Marshal Anil Chopra, veteran fighter pilot, has been in charge of flight safety in the Air Force, and he's also written a column, a nuanced column, in fact, in 2022, where he talked about the fact that India doesn't have bombers, but perhaps in the future should look at acquiring a squadron of maybe 20 of these. Air Marshal Chopra, I'll kick it off with you. There's all this talk about bombers right now. thanks to what has just happened in Iran, support your case of why you think at some point maybe India should have aircrafts of this kind?
Undoubtedly, the bombers is the flavor of the season for the last 3-4 days. B-2 visuals that you have shown, absolutely outstanding, world-class, the best that's operationally available, very expensive. Only 21 finally built, out of which 19 are still alive, 18 at the single base in the world, that is at Whiteman Base in Missouri. And of course, you have one at the Flight Test Center, the Edwards Base. Outstanding performance. You saw the 36 hours flight, but I also mentioned that the F-111s in 1986 Libya raid did low level at night with their refuelings, and they did a 6,000 mile round trip of 19 hours. Yeah. So great exercise. Yes, coming back to the question of 2007 is the last we had Canberras. We saw a last major operation by them in ISR role over Kargil in 1999, but we haven't had a bomber. And I have written many articles, as you rightly brought out, comparing that. Is it time? Because for some time, because of shortage of squadrons, we chose to have fighter bomber as a combination rather than just a dedicated bomber. And you know that even today we are down to still around 31 fighter squadrons. And therefore, the Indian Air Force, while the Tu-160M has been offered by the Russians, which is the only aircraft on offer, the Chinese are already getting set for the H-20 stealth bomber, which should be doing the first flight this year or early next year and be inducting in 2030. But India doesn't have all the leading modern bombers like from B-2, B-21 and the Chinese H-20, and some of the Russian bombers are flying wing design. That means they're subsonic, but they are stealth. That's the kind of modern bomber finally India must induct, because China is going to have one very soon. Okay. But can we afford? How many should we have? Maybe just a squadron, maybe about 15 bombers. One Tu-160 will be equivalent to the weight and payload that will be carried by 3 Su-30s. Yes. The cost will also be close to that. So we have to weigh. The Indian Air Force has been weighing this. Do we induct more Su-30s with similar weight carriage? What's the advantage? But some of the bombers like Tu-160 is supersonic. It'll fly at the same speed as the Su-30. So there are lots of pros and cons that are being looked at by the Indian Air Force, yes. Okay.
Angad, you have an opposing view to this. You don't believe that bombers belong in the Air Force at all. First of all, situate it. Why don't we have bombers, and why do you not think we need them?
I think both those answers, Shiv, are the same. And also, just to be clear, my opposing view on this is not absolute. I just don't believe that, today's Indian Air Force and for the foreseeable future needs a bomber. 50, 60 years from now, this conversation might obviously be completely different. But it's the cost benefit doesn't make sense. It's that simple. Bombers bring with them an enormous capital, manpower, sustainment burden for which India as a nation has not presented sufficient justification. There is no, let's start with, there is no national security policy or national security strategy that directs such a capability. And so by definition, there can be no downstream element of doctrine or any specific mission that demands or mandates bombers. So, both on the policy side and the capability side, I don't see the need for bombers in India at the moment and for the foreseeable future. And certainly, this sort of flavor of the month hype, the public sentiment and social media that you mentioned, keeping up with the Joneses is not the basis for sound policy. So let's not even, get swayed by that.
No, absolutely. And we don't listen to social media like that. But this is a question that has obviously been written about by serious commentators over the years as well. And it's a question that comes up from time to time. And, like the both of you said, it certainly is the flavor of the season. But just to sum up quickly before I come back to the both of you about why India and why the Indian Air Force doesn't operate bombers right now. Just a few quick things that I learned while I was researching this show. Bombers are vulnerable, obviously, in hostile airspace. So unless it is uncontested airspace, bombers are totally vulnerable to surface-to-air weaponry. India's military posture is defensive. The high cost and low priority so far is also a factor. There's no budget amidst this huge fighter shortfall that India is still struggling to meet. And there is obviously a priority on other special aircraft like early warning aircraft, refueling tankers, which, mind you, we still haven't gotten enough of, and obviously fighters, missiles, which are not quite adequate for our complete needs. Air Marshal Chopra, budgetary issues are one thing, of course. That's going to always be a struggle. But within the Air Force, has there, since 1997, been a serious kind of process of consideration about whether we need bombers? Tell us about that inside view of this. Let's forget about social media.
No, Shiv, there has not been. To be very honest, you said, 2007, when the Canberras retired, we were already getting, losing numbers of fighter squadrons, and therefore there has not been a discussion. But of late, in the last year or so, there are some people, even insiders, who thought it not be a bad idea, but the numbers are very few, and I tend to agree with Angad that the time has not yet come. But let me also be the devil's advocate and say that, there are advantages of bombers. We saw in Op Sindoor, and we have seen it in Ukraine, that the air denial has taken place. The air defense system will keep your fighters and bombers and everybody a little farther away. AWC aircraft have to be kept now maybe 300 kilometers away, or even air refuelers. If that be the case, as has been seen the last 2-3 years of conflict that we are going through, then I will tell you some advantages the bomber has. He has a real estate, huge real estate. If we are going to fight the war with air-launched cruise missiles, he can carry so many more cruise missiles. The future is going to be directed energy weapons, and he has got means to generate much greater power that will be required for laser weapons and other direct energy. So there are these pluses and minuses which we all debate as analysts when we do our research and write articles, but undoubtedly, currently, we are not in a position. There is a cost factor to it. There's a maintenance issue. The numbers you can acquire is very few. At one stage, America wanted to have something close to 150 B-2s. Finally, because of cost, it costs, average cost of a B-2 as a program cost is around $2 billion. Though the aircraft in itself costs about $780 million. So if that be the cost, so there are issues, in terms of numbers. And if America feels the issue, then you know what it could be for us. But we have all the time look at pros and cons between the two, the type of platforms. Yes.
Angad, has there, in your view, been any kind of serious or half-serious debate within the system? Given all of the things that you've listed. Since 97, in your understanding about whether India needs a bomber, within the Air Force, apparently there hasn't really been any serious discussion, but within the system, which is also outside the Air Force?
There's definitely been talk about it, Shiv, but I think the Air Force has made its decision, and the right one in my view, all the way back in 1979. Right, we had Canberra bombers. And if you look at the squadrons that operated the Canberra and what they went on to operate, the capability remained intact. If the Canberra could take, 4,000 or 5,000 pounds of ordnance 1,000 kilometers into enemy territory, they were replaced by the Jaguar that could do the same thing. But faster, lower level, more survivable in the air defense environment of that era. And the Indian Air Force has correctly, in my view, privileged multi-role tactical aircraft as a means of delivering air-to-ground strike effects, essentially. And that should be the key to any discussion on a topic like this. The aircraft, the configuration of the aircraft is a means to an end. If the goal is effects at range, then you have other ways of doing it that don't mandate a bomber.
Right.
And if the goal is something as spectacular as delivering a 30,000 pound, 15-ton penetrating bomb, then there is no option. There's no Indian option. There's no Chinese. There is no aircraft on Earth that can do that at present, apart from the B-2. And that's not available for sale or anything like that. So it's a moot point. It's not a relevant argument in this case. So I think the Air Force has done exactly what it should have, and it's perfectly logical.
Just one additional question before I bring in some more information, Angad, is what are those capabilities that we have right now that sort of negate the need for a bomber? I want to make that clear because people really want to know that.
I think fortunately for your viewers, we've seen all those capabilities in action a month ago. There's very little that a Scalp or a BrahMos or a Hammer in our security context cannot take on.
Yeah.
So what is the weight of attack that a bomber can deliver that 15 squadrons of Su-30s cannot? So and if the Indian Air Force were to grow to 40 plus squadrons of multi-role aircraft, that's enough weight of attack for me. And this line of thinking is not just borne out in India by Indian decision making, but you look at again the same flavor of the month that we're discussing right now. You look at Israel and the access to American hardware they've had for their entire existence, and enjoyed really the most cutting edge weapons that America's arsenal has had to offer. They themselves haven't gone for bombers, despite their challenge being not too different. Their challenge being Iran, their challenge being hardened facilities. They've privileged the same tactical air force that the Indian Air Force has, because they know that the real flexibility comes from things like F-15s and multiple refuelers and AWACS. And that sort of real heavy-hitting silver bullet, sort of Thor's hammer, if you will, of a B-2 is an exquisite capability, but it's simply not worth the price of admission if you're not the world's leading superpower.
$2 billion a pop. I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more questions, but before that, I just want to quickly tell our viewers about, what could lie in the future. There's a lot of speculation here, and you've heard the two experts have their view, but for deep strikes across borders, bombers are obviously very useful for dominance in the Indian Ocean, to counter the Chinese naval buildup, to launch multiple standoff strikes. Bombers are, considered to be aircraft carriers of the sky. They have a great psychological deterrent effect as well. But you've heard the specifics of why India doesn't and probably doesn't need bombers at this point of time. Very quickly, I'm almost out of time, but Marshal Chopra, what could hypothetically change in the years or the decades going forward that could alter this current situation? Angad also started by saying that things could change in the future where his position may also change as far as the requirement of bombers is concerned. What is that could change?
Yeah, Shiv, so it's coming out clear. I think there's a general consensus in the studio today between Angad, you and I, that first we have to give priority to fighter aircraft. We have to give priority to cruise missiles on them. We have to give priority to stealth, which seems to be important because that's what the three major powers are working on. And the bomber will come only after we cross maybe 40 squadrons or so of the fighters and fighter bombers, if I may use that word. So bombers are a little far away as far as India is concerned, but I want to mention that the global powers, we are number 4 in military strength, but the first 3 have or are soon going to have stealth bombers like China, and they're going to continue to maintain significant bomber fleets. We will remain number 4. The power index in the global power, even for aerospace, between the first 3 and us, the gap is very, very large. So if we want to become a big power one day, after we have satisfied our hunger for fighters, which we desperately need, one day we will have to look at bombers, maybe 15, 20 years down the line. That's the timelines we are talking of.
Angad, same question to you. What could qualitatively change that would change, your posture on what India should do as far as bombers are concerned?
Well, for me, it would be 2 things. I'll echo what the Air Marshal said on budget. We're number 4, but we're also a distant 4th in the world. China spends 4 or 5 times what we do on defense. So the day that we're spending 5x what we do on defense today, I might be more comfortable with the idea of a bomber, but that 5x is a long way away. And of course, the most important element of directing budget is government position. The government has to decide, bombers, it's inherently an offensive platform. And India has historically not had that posture. So the government will have to decide what is India's military posture going to look like, and if that military posture warrants bombers.
You know, while this show has been on air, a couple of people have pinged in to ask Angad, and I'll leave that last question to you. It is obviously a simplistic one, but it'll be good to have your view on that. China has the H-6 bomber. So the obvious question that many people will have is, why doesn't India need it in a similar way? Can you contextualize that for us?
Very simply, China's principal security problem is a distant superpower, America. Our principal security problem is on our border, China. So while payload may be an important factor in driving aircraft choices, range is not so critical in our theater. And that's sort of why the bomber has died out regionally. I mean, even Pakistan used to have bombers and they no longer do. So I think that's kind of where we are.
Angad Singh and Marshal Anil Chopra always learn a thing or two, more than a thing or two really tonight, on why India doesn't have a bomber, why it doesn't need one right now for sure, and why things could definitely change going into the future. So as you see those pictures of the B-2, of that fabulous, enigmatic aircraft, keep these things in mind. This is a very, very serious business. It's a wrap on India Matters. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you at the same time tomorrow. The Last Word with Maria Shakil comes up next, where we're putting our focus back on the Iran-Israel war. They've exchanged a lot of damaging weapons today. Lots of missiles have struck in both countries. The question now is, will Iran's friends now step in? And they've got some powerful friends. That's next on The Last Word.